Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you've had a chance to see the last video, the horizontal stab fairings, the elevator fairings. That's all done. So happy to have that out of the way. It looks great. It was a lot of work. Little tweaks need to be done, but that'll be a later process. Now we are on to the vertical stab and the rudder, which is going to involve several different things. We've got the top and bottom fairings to deal with. I'm going to work on the vertical stab, I'm going to work on the rudder first, get those fairings done, then I'm going to work on the vertical stab, which is going to buy me some time for some other parts I have coming in for the USB power mods that I talked about, which, if you didn't see me talk about it before, this is the one that's going to go in the tail. It's going to surface mount and be nice and flush. It's already got that little plug I talked about in there. It'll be removable so I can get to the wiring. That'll be good. I bought this buck converter to go from 12 volts to the 5 volts steady for the USB source, along with these little USB-C leads. So that will be the basis for how I power these. I bought one to try right now. I'll buy another one for the wing later. I like it because it's ruggedly built. It's aluminum, so it should give good heatsink qualities. And we're going to test this thing out before we ever use it. I'm going to hook it up to a power supply and try it out. And it's super light. So this should be a pretty good find. A couple other things that came in. I got a whole package of the little heat shrink solder sleeves. And I finally got me a somewhat dedicated non-paint stripper heat gun to do my heat shrink and the solder sleeves and things like that. That's what I'm going to use for butt splicing wires. Something I started working on this morning without you guys here, which I will say it is April 26th. It is Saturday. Part of what has to happen with this fairing, as you can see, this is where the tail light goes. And here's my Fly LED's tail light. What they give you to mount this is this little half moon mount that just clamps it in kind of on one side. You know me, I can't leave well enough alone. I think it was Flyboy Accessories or somebody used to make an aluminum ring to mount those things. So I actually started fabbing this up out of some thicker angle aluminum I had laying around. And what that's going to do is it's going to be a mount plate. I got to finish shaping it. But this will get some holes in it and get riveted to the fiberglass once it's shaped and live there permanently and sit there all nice and flush. And I've already drilled and tapped for 632 screws to mount holes here. This way I can easily replace this light or get to the wiring by just unscrewing it and pulling it out, and then there'll be a nice stable mount ring that's always there for it. So that's more what you're going to see right away. Then I'll get into the rest of the rudder, get this thing all trimmed and in there. Lots of little things happening, and that's it. I don't know if this is going to be one video broken up over several days, or if I'm going to break this video up into a few. We'll see how this goes. I'm hoping it's easier than what I tried doing to the horizontal stab, but you know how that goes. Intro Tim is always way more optimistic than what voiceover Tim is after he's had to do it all. In other news, I did go fly with the Bay Area Aero Club today. I got checked out in the Archer. Unfortunately, their tailwheel plane is down for maintenance, so I have to wait till that's back before I can start flying it. But I have a really nice, clean, beautifully flying airplane that I can go fly on a regular basis now. I'm very excited about that. I didn't bring the camera and record it just because this was my checkout flight. Next time I go fly, I will do that so I can start finally posting some more flying videos. So yeah, hopefully you enjoy this. Stick around, and voiceover Tim will tell you what really happens. See you later. All right, as advertised, it's a voiceover Tim part. This is where I tell you what really happened. First, I want to apologize for the audio in the intro there. I guess that's what I get for having the mic shoved all the way up in the fat of my neck like that. I'll try to make sure the next one's a little bit better. Anyhow, while this wasn't as horrible as the horizontal stab and elevators, it still was a lot of work, a whole lot of sanding. So we'll get to that. I included a lot more so you can enjoy some of that with me this time. Right now you see me working on that that light trim ring. I have found out that Flyboy Accessories does still make that trim ring. I thought they discontinued it for some reason. It is only 15 bucks. So if you're doing this, I would recommend going and buying one rather than having to make your own. But it wasn't too hard to fab. Made it out of that angle that I showed earlier. Lots of grinding, lots of tweaking. Right there, I'm just kind of beveling the inside edge of it because the light, the back of the circuit board on the light is sealed up with some silicone, and it kind of bevels out a little bit, and I wanted this thing to be able to sit nice and flush without making that hole any bigger, so I just beveled it until it sat nicely. And I still got to go in there and clean it up. You look at the close-up picture, you can definitely see file marks on it. Once I got that on, I realized that the flat part, or once I got it made, I realized the flat part there of the fairing wasn't actually like true. It was angled to one side a little bit. So before I started anything else, I made a little makeshift dam out of some tape and poured a little tiny bit of resin and micro in there. And now I'm resanding it to true and flat and straight with the fairing. So the light will point straight. Small things, but since I'm going to the trouble of doing all this work, I might as well make sure that it's as good as I can make it. So cleaning up the edges, making it true and straight, getting the ring mounted now. And I'm just using that ring as a template for drilling for the rivets, drilling for the holes for the 632 screws that are going to hold it in. And then once I get it on there, the center hole, which easy enough, I just pop a quick hole in the middle, use the unibit, waller most of that out, and then a little file work, and good to go. On to fitting the fairings. So I thought I was being clever, getting out that ruler and measuring and trying to translate some angles and all this stuff for that notch. The notch has to be cut at an angle because of the angle that thing goes at and the fact that you have to push this all the way up in there. I did not do as well as I thought. If I was doing it again, I would recommend getting a piece of cardboard or something and cutting it so that the long edge butts up with the bottom of the skin like the part does, and then cutting your notch out of that until you got a template you're happy with and just transfer that over. So instead, I ended up having to keep cutting, and unfortunately, it's the back edge that was tight. The front edge was actually really far away. But we'll get to that. Some final tweaking to get it on there, and the last difficulty with putting this on, and I don't know if this is the same for everybody, but that fairing has to go over those flanges on the bottom of the rudder. And it is super tight, especially at the trailing edge. In fact, it's so tight that I thought maybe I was wrong and it's supposed to go underneath it. So here you see me referencing the internet and seeing what others have done to make sure this thing is supposed to go on the way it is supposed to go on. And it is supposed to go over that flange, which makes sense because that's what it rivets to. But it was super tight. It was a combination of using the hand seamer there and bending the trailing edge tabs in just a little and pulling out the fiberglass a little to get it to lay nice and flat. So trace the rivet line, and the plans say to put rivets 2 inches on center. The very trailing edge holes on these, I did make holes for rivets there, but decided that I didn't want to run into the same issue I'd run into before, which I did on the top part because I had no choice. The holes were already there. But that's the countersunk rivets I have, which is what the plans call for. The CS4-4s are too long to fit the trailing edges. You can get one in, but you can't get a second rivet in of pretty much any kind because it's so long. So on the top fairing, I went ahead and put some shorter rivets in that I had, but they're not countersunk, so I had to build that up more to kind of hide them and allude to the fact that I didn't put those there. But in retrospect, if you're going to do it, find yourself some shorter countersunk pull rivets for those trailing edges. You don't need a whole lot, but have a few on hand. So, true to form, I cut those front flanges a little too short, and I would like to put a rivet in there to help hold that up tight, which means I got to rebuild some flange material that I cut off. Good news is I'm getting really, really good at rebuilding flange material. In fact, I mixed up the resin, glassed in a new flange, and then took what was left of the resin and mixed up some flux with it and spread that all on in one fell swoop. Saved me one drying cycle and having to come back and do it later. Like I said, sadly, I'm getting very good at that. Hopefully, if you do the template method instead of trying to measure and be clever like I was, you can avoid all of that. Anyhow, putting the counterbalance weight in, which the first time I fit the top cap fairing there in, I forgot that weight wasn't in there. I'm glad I remembered before anything got riveted. That would have sucked. So now just drilling out my holes. Fairly straightforward. And I'm going to go ahead and get that dimple out that I've got for the pulled countersunk rivets. And quickly I'm figuring out I can't dimple the front ones with the weight in there. So the weight has to come back out. Once the weight's out, I can easily reach those holes and dimple them. Now that that's all done, make sure I put the weight back in because yeah, don't want to forget that. Off camera, I went ahead and countersunk the holes in the fiberglass so they'll fit up against the dimples, and now it's just put in the CS4-4 rivets, except for the, like I said, two trailing edge ones. I can't remember which ones I used. They're not quite flush. They sit just a little bit proud, but not a whole lot. If I was doing this again, I would get countersunk rivets for it, or just fill the hole with resin and micro and call it good, because it's probably more than strong enough that way. So here's the first round of micro and resin. Not glassing these over like I did the elevators on the horizontal stab. For the vertical stab, since I have the two camera mount screws that are fairly close to that line, I wanted to be able to do this without having to spread it out and feather it so much. Now obviously this is the rudder, not the vertical stab, but I wanted them to match. So if the line was going to be there, I wanted it to be just a nice clean line all the way across. We'll see what happens when I get to that. If I didn't mention it, this entire episode I decided is just going to be the rudder. The whole thing, footage-wise, was about a little over 6 hours of work. There was some stuff I didn't record, so I would say I've probably got about 8 hours of total work into just the rudder, just the fairings on the rudder. And mind you, that's not 8 hours straight. It's, put on some resin, let it cure, come back, sand. Anyhow, got the lower fairing mounted, got the light trim ring mounted. That is all riveted in place. I did a little bit more sanding on the fairing to make it match up flush with the edges of that ring that I made. And now same thing over again. Clean it all off really good. And more micro and resin. That blue tape you saw me stick in there, that's just acting as a little dam so that it doesn't drip down onto the hinge bearing that's in there. I also went back and wrapped those with some tape just to make sure I didn't get anything on them. Lessons learned already. Spread it thin if you can. Figure out what the high spots are that need to be built up, and that's where you need to put it. So for this, I don't really need a lot of resin on like the rivet line, just enough to help kind of cover them. The bulk of it needs to be on the bottom of the rudder to fill that out so that it meets nice and smooth. That's what it looks like after putting it on there. A whole bunch around the control horn just to fill in those spaces. And now it's on to sanding. Lots and lots of sanding. And I sped this up to 40 times speed. Normally I speed these videos up to 10 times speed. But I wanted you to see what goes into all of the sanding and more microing and resining and stuff like that, and let you experience some of that with me. But I did speed it up so you don't have to suffer all of it. I have no idea how much sandpaper I went through. In case anybody's curious, I used the Permagrit sanding block, which has a really coarse side and then a slightly less coarse side, to knock down the really big chunks. And then once that's roughly down where I want it, I switch to these sanding blocks, and I have a roll of 220 grit sandpaper, and that's what I'm sanding everything to. Gives me a smooth enough finish that I can work with, and then shoot some primer over. And when you see me put primer on later, the primer is a primer sealer, and anything that reveals just some light scratches or some really tiny pinholes, I have some fillable sandable primer that I'll spray over that. And then before I actually paint the plane or primer it or anything like that, I'll go back over everything, sand most of this back down to give me a good surface to work with. And anything that needs touching up after that point will get one last layer of some body filler of some sort, maybe some glazing or something like that. This is by no means perfect. It is done. There are some slight imperfections here and there that'll have to be addressed later on during paint, but the bulk of it is done. It came out looking pretty good. I'm happy with it. I'm sure if you look close enough at it, you'll see stuff. With the primer on it, I can identify things I didn't see before. I actually went back over it a couple times with the primer, filling in some imperfections. As far as like waviness and stuff goes, kind of hard to tell with the flat primer. I may have to hit it with something a little glossier just to see what I'm working with later on, but it feels like it's pretty good. So that's it. I'm going to leave some final photos of what this thing looks like when it's all done here, and you can see how that turned out. I even put the light in just so you can see the light in there. And starting tomorrow, I'm going to start working on the vertical stab. Today is the 28th of April, by the way, in case anybody's keeping track, 2025. But I'll start on the vertical stab tomorrow. I finally got the conduit in, so I can start getting all of that stuff done. Hopefully it'll go a little quicker, but that's just me being optimistic. I do have one fairing to put in and a couple pieces of foam to block out the ends, but we'll see how it goes. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed it. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Go check out the podcast. Episode 9 is up right now. Is it episode 9? Episode 8? I don't even remember now. Anyways, I will see you all in the next one.